Hello everyone, welcome back to another session by K21 Academy. Today our expert trainer will be talking about Domain 1, that is Manage Azure Resources for Machine Learning. So let's get into the video.
So this is one of the important topics that has about 25 to 30% weightage. All right. So these are the 6 sub-points that we have, and some of them has been recently added. Okay, whether Databricks and security are all right. So now let's get started. So this is the slide, or this is something that we have gone through on day 1. But of course, every session, every lab that we do, we might be familiar with this, right? So the first thing we do is create a workspace. And what workspace we are creating? We are creating a Azure Machine Learning workspace, which is going to be sitting within a resource group. And we don't need to go much wider into that because we are not learning about cloud. Rather, our focus is on the machine learning. But as you know, inside every Azure account, you have at the top level, you have tenant. And with the tenant, you have something called Azure AD that does the authentication. All right. Then you have many management groups. Okay. So management groups represent different entities within a company. All right. And your subscription can represent a different department, or it depends how you want to structure them. One of the key thing about subscription is everything that you use in the cloud resource is going to be billed at subscription level. Okay. So under management group, you have subscription. Under subscription, you can have many resource groups. So the ones that you and me, we work on mostly at the subscription level. So you have your Azure Pass, or you have a particular subscription. Then that subscription also has certain quotas, right? Let's say maximum it comes with 20 CPU quota. If you need more, then you need to request them to increase your quota. So that is at the subscription level. Then you can have many resource group, and inside the resource group is where we are creating a workspace. So workspace is a service that is given by Azure, all right? And once we create the service, we launch the workspace. This is where all our data science workload, okay, or machine learning workload is taking place. Be it bringing the data, be it provisioning the compute resource that can be used to train your models or to work with your data. All of that is done within your workspace, okay? So then we have pipelines, okay? So of course, once we go into our workspace, the workspace has all of these features, okay? Be it using the features like automated ML or pipelines, or you have the designer, which helps you to, again, orchestrate your entire machine learning workflow, all right? So we have used all of that. And with data, you can use your data set and data stores. And of course, as you create many different experiments, you need to keep a track of them. You need to have a run ID or run versions that you can compare, all right? So all of that is sitting within our workspace, okay? Of course, not forgetting the models. And you have, okay, so storage account, you have storage account is another service that is created by, that is provided by Azure. And when you are provisioning your workspace, the 3 default things that you also can enable, which is storage account, key vault, and application insight. Your storage account is for that workspace, okay? So later on, if you need additional workspace to hold the data, for example, you are creating a machine learning project to handle with all your CSV file or Excel file, for example. Then as we have explored in the lab, you could simply bring them from a web URL, or maybe you have that file locally. You can upload them and bring them, and that stores as part of your blob store or file store, right? So what is that blob store or file store? That is nothing but a type of a storage account, okay? So storage account is something that you create, and this can be used. And later on, if you need to scale it up, you can scale it up. Let's say you're going to work on a deep learning project, or here you're going to work with all the image data, okay? So then we really need to provision higher storage capacity because the image data requires more space to get stored. So then you can have a blob storage, but you can also specify the size of it. Okay, so we have a storage account, that is one thing that gets provisioned, and we have a key vault. This is like our safe vault where we can keep some of the most valuable and sensible information, like your password, like your encryption keys that you might use, all right? Or you can use certificates. Okay, so all of that, for example, when we publish our models to be consumed by the endpoints, okay? So if you recall, we take the REST endpoint key, and we also take sometimes the primary key, okay, of that resource. We use them. So now if you want to automate, again, here it is not going to talk to you, or the exam is not going to test you in depth in this level, but you need to know why is this resource is being deployed, what purpose. At least that much is something that you should be aware, all right? So we are going to keep all those information inside our key vault, and application inside basically tells us how the deployed application, okay? So the model, once it is trained and deployed, it is going to be consumed by the application or end user, for example. So who is consuming, which capability of our application is widely used, mostly used, things like that. You want to know the insight into the usage of your application, okay? So to enable that, you have again application insight, that is something gets created automatically as part of your workspace, okay? So let's take a sample question. I hope you can be alert to answer this. Which of the following descriptions accurately describes Azure Machine Learning? All right. So it is our cloud-based platform for operating your ML solutions at scale. Okay. So now coming to the second, data stores and data set. Okay, so we can bring data from whether individual files, or we can also bring from web and so on. So we have two concepts. We have data stores and data set. Data stores are used for storing the connection information. Okay, so when you want to connect to different other sources from where you can bring in the data. So the connection informations are stored, while your data sets are references to the data source location itself. Okay. Again, data sets is, it's a version. You are giving a version number, right? So that you will know which version number is used to train which model. Okay. So because the same data set can be used to train maybe in multiple model training and so on. So the data set, you can have a version number. So which are some of the sources where we can connect, all right? So you have Azure Storage, then you have Data Lake, and you have Azure SQL Database or Azure Databricks file system, okay? But when you are provisioning a workspace, by default, you have two data store that gets deployed, right? So one is your blob container, the other is a storage file container. Okay, so blob is your default container. Can you change this to file container? Yes, can. When do you think we might need to change from blob to file? So let's say if you're going to work with image data, okay, so image data, there your data set is going to be maybe, let's say, 500 images. Okay, so you're using the images to train a model. So at this case, you will go from blob to a file container because you can have 500 image files as your data set. Okay, so depending on, let's say you have CSV and other things, you can still use the blob. But if you want to, depends on the project, if you're handling images and all, then you can go for the file container. And this can be accessed directly in code by using your Azure ML SDK, and you can further use it to download or upload or mount a data store in an experiment to read or write the data. So if you're using SDK and write the code, this is how it will be, all right? And we have seen this, the codes that throughout the course that we have used. If you're thinking, hey, part of the course, you have already given me a code. How about in practical scenario? You know, who is going to give me the code, right? You don't need to worry. These are all the standard codes, which means you have access. And GitHub is one location where you will find tons of these sample codes available. So if you're going to read a data source, it is not going to be any different than what you have already used. Okay. So when you get into real projects or in real work, you will become familiar with handling the code as well. Okay. Until you are learning to handle the code, thanks to Azure, because this is a visual interface, you can always use your visual interface to get started. And eventually you can move on to using the codes as well. All right. So in case, in the back of your mind, if you have that doubt, hey, how come my hands-on skills in handling the code is not so good? Not to worry, you will pick that up along the way. Then we have datasets in Azure, all right? So we have file dataset and tabular dataset, and dataset is basically a schema, or as I mentioned, it is a version data object that you can use for different experiments, all right? And okay, let's take a sample question. Okay, please read the question. The answer is B, all right? So we are going to create the reference and pass it in the script as a parameter. So it will come from, it will be taken from there, all right? So again, you have the links. Again, whatever I'm showing you today, the whole slide deck, you can click on the links and practice on all the different question sets, okay, for each of this module. Okay, so then let's talk about compute, which is one of the main thing, all right? So compute or compute target is a machine or set of machines that are used to run your training script, okay? To simply put, anything that you want to process or run, you need a compute power. That's like an electricity. Without that, you cannot run anything, all right? So the underlying power that you are giving to your workspace is provisioning a compute resource. And we have few types of compute targets that we can deploy. One is local compute. This is our compute instance by default. We provision one first, right? Then compute cluster is something that we can provision additionally, okay? The difference here is your compute cluster can be easily attached for a particular experiment or when you are running a particular model training. On top of that, your compute cluster can be easily scaled up and scaled down. Okay, so in the cloud, we have scale out, scale in, scale up, scale down. We have few, all right? So, of course, all of them are basically talking about the scalability. And one of the great features with cloud is that as our demand or as our requirement or as our workload increases, the resources that are required to handle those requirements or workload must also increase. For example, here, if you're going to run a training a model, and here, let's say you are dealing with the image data, for example, and you cannot just use, of course, to handle image data, instead of CPU, you will be provisioning a GPU, okay, GPU as your compute instance. But again, how many to deploy, okay? So let's say CPU, you have deployed 4 CPU cores. But when the workload increase, you want it to increase to 8 CPU cores. And when the workload decrease, you want the compute instance to decrease to maybe 2, okay? So with compute cluster, you are able to set this up, okay? So you're able to scale up and scale down dynamically depending on the workload, okay? So that is the difference, the main difference between your compute instance and compute cluster. Then you have inference cluster. It is a container-based deployment target. So once we have deployed, all right, and you're going to bring in the new data to get the prediction. You need a compute instance, again, just like electricity. You need electricity even there as well. So you need a compute power even there. So for that purpose, we will have something called inference cluster. Then you have attached compute. So let's say you don't want to provision any compute instance from within this workspace. You already have, let's say, as a company, maybe you have some cloud resources. You have, let's say, you reserve a particular resource for a 1-year period and with certain usage capacity. You already have that available. Can you bring that and attach it to your machine learning workspace? The answer is yes. And the way to do it is using the attached compute, right? So you can bring from Azure Databricks. Okay, Azure Databricks again is a cloud analytical, and you have an engine that runs to process your data and so on. All right. Okay, so if you recall, this is how it looks. We have under compute, under manage, we have compute instances where we can go ahead and deploy them and use them to run all our experiments and so on. Okay, so good question. So let's take this question. Okay, so here are the options. All right, so B is the right answer. So next, implementing security and access control in Azure Machine Learning. Okay, so of course, Azure as a platform provides Azure AD and RBAC. Okay, so when we talk about providing access to anything, there are two aspects. One is authentication, the other is authorization. Authentication is basically verifying the person who they say they are before they come to access anything, right? So for example, if you're going to access your email, you have an authentication process. You need to key in the username and password, verifying that, then they let you in, all right? And once you go in, what you can do, okay, comes with the permission, okay, whether you are able to consume, whether you are able to delete a resource or anything. So that is called authorization. So to do authorization, we use something called Azure RBAC, which is role-based access control. Here you can give a fine-grained access to a user or application, precisely what they can do once they are having access to our resources. Whereas our Azure AD do the authentication. Okay, so authentication comes first, then authorization. Why we call this role-based access control? So the way we assign or give a particular user the permission to do something is by giving a collective access or permission to a role. Okay, so a particular role might need to do few things. So we assign all of them into the role. Then we assign the role to the particular user. Okay, so what are the different roles we can create? Okay, so we have reader role, contributor role, owner, and custom role. Okay, so you can go ahead and further read them and get them, but these are the roles we can create and then assign these roles to the users. All right, so then we have ML development environment. Okay, so we can create compute instance and we can also create all the other ones that we have mentioned and do that. And of course, you can work with Python and what do you call that? The Visual Studio Code editor, or you can use the Jupyter Notebook. Okay, so all of those environments you can use to seamlessly create your machine learning workload and train them. All right. Then we have Azure Databricks. Okay. So as we talked about, Azure Databricks is something that helps you to, okay, let me bring it here. So this is your workspace in an environment for accessing all of your Databricks assets. All right. So like I said, you might not have really missed out anything about the Databricks because this is something is available in your machine learning platform. This helps you to incorporate all the managed services whether for tracking your experiments or training your model or feature development and management or serving. Okay. And your Databricks has some of the libraries, all right, and you can use some of the features of Databricks, which is feature store or experiments or models or AutoML. Okay, I'm sure we have used AutoML and you can recall. All of that is something that we can use within the workspace that we have created, where you have the Databricks machine learning as well. All right. So this is something that we have lately added into this.
So guys, this was our expert, and if in case you missed upon anything and you could not understand any of the technical keywords, then we have something really special for you. We have our free class on Microsoft Azure Data Scientist Certification demo along with some question and answers, that is DP-100. And if you want to gain access to this free course, then you just have to log on to k21academy.com/DP10002. Under this course, you'll be learning about why to learn Azure Cloud and some of the amazing market trends for machine learning. You'll be getting a certification roadmap. You'll be working on real life demos as to how to create ML workspace in Azure. You'll be learning about training and deploying a classification model in Azure and machine learning and what not. So, if you really want to enroll for this free course, then all you have to do is just log on to k21academy.com/DP10002. After that, you'll be seeing a page like this. You just have to click on book your free seat now and select your event date according to your availability. Enter your name, your email address, your phone number, and click on yes, save my seat. Moving ahead, you'll be getting this kind of page where you'll be seeing this kind of URL on your extreme right. Save that URL, add it to your calendars, and I'll see you in the free class. Till then, take care and keep learning.